My husband divorced me 4 years ago for my own sister. Today, I stepped out of a limousine in front of his failing company, not as the weak wife he discarded, but as the billionaire holding his debt. He froze, staring at the 3-year-old boy gripping my hand who had his exact eyes. Mark thought he was meeting an investor to save his company, but he did not realize he was staring at the secret he threw away. My name is Evelyn, and at 34 years old, I watched the world from behind the tinted, bulletproof glass of a stretched limousine. Outside, the gray Chicago rain washed over a crumbling 3-story office building that looked as tired and defeated as I once was. That peeling beige paint in the cracked pavement belonged to MJ Tech Solutions, the failing company run by my ex-husband, Mark, and my younger sister, Jessica. It was almost poetic to see the physical decay of the place matching the moral rot of the people inside it. 4 years ago, on the night of my 30th birthday, that same man had thrown my clothes onto the wet street while my sister watched from the window of the bedroom I had decorated. I remembered the biting cold of that night and the humiliation that burned hotter than any fire. I had been homeless, pregnant, and broken, discarded like trash so they could play house. Now, I sat in a vehicle worth more than their entire company. I adjusted the lapel of my bespoke Alexander McQueen blazer, smoothing out an imperceptible crease. On the tablet resting on my knee, the acquisition file for their company glowed with a predatory light. I was no longer the weeping wife begging for an explanation. I was the CEO of Novus Holdings, a financial shark circling a wounded seal, and I was about to take the first bite. "Mama!" A soft voice pulled me from my dark thoughts. Beside me sat Leo. At 3.5 years old, he was already sharper than most adults I knew. He sat perfectly still in his miniature navy wool coat, his small fingers deft as he solved a complex wooden puzzle. He was the secret I had carried away that night, the son Mark never knew existed. "Sarah," I said, turning to the nanny sitting opposite us. "Once we step out, please take Leo for a walk in Millennium Park. It is just 2 blocks away. I do not want him to see the ugliness inside that building." I reached for the door handle, but a small, warm hand grabbed my pinky finger. Leo looked up at me with eyes that were a terrifying mirror of his father. I want to walk with you, Mama," Leo said, his voice firm despite his age. "Just for a little bit." "Please?" I hesitated, looking at his determined face. He always sensed when I was steeling myself for battle. I nodded once, unable to deny him. The driver opened the heavy door, and an umbrella instantly bloomed above my head to shield me from the downpour. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. My red-bottomed heels struck the wet concrete with a sharp, authoritative click that cut through the sound of the rain. The contrast was brutal. I stood there in immaculate couture, flanked by security and a luxury vehicle, glowing like a diamond against the backdrop of their dingy, failing operation. The glass doors of the building burst open. Mark and Jessica rushed out, breathless and eager. They were expecting a mysterious angel investor from Novus Holdings to save them from bankruptcy. Mark looked gaunt, his cheap suit hanging loosely on his frame, while Jessica looked frantic, clutching a stack of wet files. "Welcome, we are so honored to—" Mark began, his voice practiced and oily. Then he stopped. The smile slid off his face like sludge. He froze mid-step, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream of recognition. Beside him, Jessica gasped, her face draining of all color until she looked like a ghost. "Evelyn," she whispered, the name choking her. It can't be." I did not say a word. I just stood there, letting the rain dampen the air around us while I remained dry and untouched. Then, Mark's eyes drifted downward. His gaze locked onto the small boy holding my hand. He stared at the dark curls, the shape of the nose, and those distinct amber eyes that stared back at him with unnerving intelligence. It was like looking into a time machine. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. "That boy," Mark stammered, his finger trembling as he pointed. He he looks just like—" Jessica let out a sharp breath, and the files she was holding slipped from her numb fingers. They scattered into the muddy puddles at her feet, ruining months of work in a single second. But she did not even blink. She was too busy staring at the child who should not exist. The silence that stretched between us was heavy with 4 years of lies and secrets. I felt a surge of cold, potent power. This was the moment I had replayed in my mind 1,000 times while scrubbing dishes in a diner to buy formula. I curved my lips into a smile that did not reach my eyes. "Hello, Mark. Hello, Jessica," I said, my voice smooth and dangerous. "It has been a long time. Haven't you missed me?" The rain on my face today was cold, but it was nothing compared to the storm that destroyed my life 4 years ago. Standing there, staring at their terrified faces, my mind dragged me back to the moment I died and was reborn. 4 years ago, I was not a shark in a tailored suit. I was a tired, devoted wife who worked 14 hours a day as an administrative assistant, ruining my eyes and my posture to fund Mark's startup dream. I came home every night smelling of toner and stale coffee, only to cook dinner and clean the house while Mark sat on the couch, talking about his grand vision. I believed in him. I believed that my sacrifice was the foundation of our future empire. Then Jessica arrived. She showed up at our door with a tear-stained face and a suitcase, playing the role of the helpless, unemployed little sister who needed a place to stay. I welcomed her with open arms. I gave her the spare room. I did not see the way her eyes lingered on my husband. I was too exhausted to notice the smell of vanilla perfume, her perfume clinging to Mark's shirts. I ignored the texts he deleted the second I walked into the room and the secret. Heavy glances they exchanged over the dinner table. I was a fool who thought loyalty was a currency that everyone valued. The day my world shattered was the day I turned 30. I had rushed home early, clutching a positive pregnancy test in my purse, my heart bursting with the news that we were finally going to be a family. I walked into the living room, ready to surprise him. Instead, I found my suitcases packed by the door. Mark was sitting in the armchair, and Jessica was perched on the armrest, her hand resting casually on his shoulder. "We need to talk." "Evelyn," Mark said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "I want a divorce." The words hit me like a physical blow. I clutched my purse tighter, feeling the plastic stick burning against my palm. "Divorce, but why, Mark? We are just getting started," I stammered, my voice trembling. Mark looked at me with a sneer that I had never seen before. It was a look of pure contempt. "Look at you. Evelyn, you are always tired. You are boring. You are old." He spat the words out. "Jessica understands me. She gives me inspiration. She makes me feel alive in a way you never could." I looked at my sister, begging for her to deny it, but she just smirked. That innocent mask she had worn for months dissolved, revealing the predator underneath. "It is not just about love, Evelyn," Jessica said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We checked the accounts. The joint savings are empty. We know you stole the money to prepare for this. You are trying to leave Mark penniless." I gasped, unable to breathe. They had drained the account and framed me. It was a calculated, vicious setup to ensure I left with nothing. I never took a cent. How could you? Jessica, you are my sister." I cried out. "Get out!" Mark barked. "Get out before I call the police." I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull out the pregnancy test and throw it in his face. I wanted to tell him that he was kicking out his own child. But then, Mark turned to Jessica and laughed, a cruel, free sound. "God, can you imagine if she was pregnant? Being tied down with a screaming brat right now would be hell, he said, kissing Jessica's hand. I just want to be free to enjoy my success. That sentence sealed my lips. I realized in that second that Mark did not deserve to be a father. He did not deserve to know about the life growing inside me. I picked up my bags. I walked out into the pouring rain without a dollar to my name, carrying nothing but humiliation and the tiny heartbeat inside me. The months that followed were a blur of hunger and despair. I washed dishes in the back of a greasy diner until my hands were raw and bleeding. I lived in a basement room that smelled of mold, counting every penny to buy prenatal vitamins. There were nights when I wanted to give up, but every time I felt the baby kick, a fire ignited in my chest. I would not die here. I would not let them win. My salvation came in the form of Mr. Henderson, my old university professor. He walked into the diner one evening, saw me scrubbing a pot, and recognized the student who had once topped his finance class. He did not pity me. He saw potential. You have a fire in your eyes, Evelyn, he had told me. Do not waste it on tears. Use it to burn them down. He gave me a job as a junior analyst at Novus Holdings. I worked harder than I ever had in my life, fueled by a hatred that was cold and sharp. I climbed the ladder with a baby on my hip and vengeance in my heart. And now, 4 years later, I was back, not to beg, but to collect. The air in the cramped conference room was stale, smelling faintly of mold and desperation. I sat at the head of the scratched mahogany table, a piece of furniture that had seen better days, much like the two people sitting opposite me. I placed my tablet on the surface with a deliberate, heavy thud that made Jessica flinch. The power dynamic in the room was palpable. 4 years ago, I would have been serving them coffee in this room. Today, I owned the air they breathed. Mark could not keep his eyes on the papers. He kept glancing nervously toward the window, trying to catch a glimpse of the park across the street where Sarah was walking Leo. Evelyn, Mark started, his voice cracking slightly. That boy outside. He looks about 3 or 4 years old. Is he yours? I did not even look up from my screen. I swiped a finger across the glass, bringing up a spreadsheet of their disastrous quarterly earnings. Let us stay focused on the agenda, Mark, I said, my voice clipped and professional. According to these figures, your operating costs have increased by 40%, while your revenue has dropped by half. You are bleeding money. Jessica slammed her hand on the table, her face flushed with anger. She was trying to regain control, trying to be the boss she pretended to be. Who do you think you are to lecture us? She spat out. You are just an ex-wife who got lucky. You do not understand how this business works. I leaned back in my chair and looked at her with pity. I understand that you have driven a profitable company into the ground in less than 48 months, I replied calmly. You fired the entire veteran sales team to hire your friends. You ignored the market shift toward AI integration. You are not a victim of bad luck. Jessica, you are a victim of your own incompetence. Jessica opened her mouth to scream, but I cut her off. And before you throw me out, you should know exactly who you are talking to. Novus Holdings did not just buy your business debt. Through our subsidiaries, we purchased the distressed mortgage on the property at 42 Oak Street. Mark's face went white. The blood drained from his lips. That is my parents' house, he whispered. That is the only thing I have left. It is the collateral for your business loans, I corrected him. And since you have defaulted on 3 consecutive payments, I have the legal right to foreclose on it tomorrow morning. Mark slumped in his chair. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him. He was not just losing his company. He was losing his inheritance, his home, and his dignity. He looked toward the window again. I saw the gears turning in his head. He saw a wealthy woman, a powerful investor, and a child who looked exactly like him. I could see the regret forming in his eyes, not for what he did to me, but for the life of luxury he had thrown away. "Please," Mark said, his voice dropping to a beg. "There has to be another way. We can work something out, for old time's sake." I tapped my fingers on the table, letting the silence stretch out until it was uncomfortable. "There is one option," I said slowly. "I will grant you a 6-month extension on the debt repayment. I will freeze the foreclosure." Mark's eyes lit up with hope. "Thank you. I knew you still cared about." "However," I interrupted, my voice sharpening like a blade, "in exchange, you will grant my team full, unrestricted access to your internal financial records. I am sending in my own forensic auditors. They will go through every single transaction from the last 4 years." "No!" Jessica shrieked, jumping to her feet. "Absolutely not! We cannot have strangers digging through our private files. Mark, tell her no." Her reaction was too big, too loud. She was terrified. She knew what those files would reveal. Mark, however, was blinded by greed. He looked at Evelyn, then at Jessica, and made his choice. He wanted to save his house, and perhaps he thought he could use this time to win me back. "Shut up, Jessica," Mark snapped. He turned to me and nodded. "We agree. Send in your auditors. Just save the house?" "Excellent." I stood up, smoothing down my suit. "My team starts at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Have everything ready." I walked out of the conference room without looking back. As I reached the door, I paused. "Oh, and Mark," I said over my shoulder, "do not think this is a favor. This is strictly business." I left them bickering in that sad little room. When I returned to the luxury suite at the Peninsula Hotel, Leo was waiting for me. He ran across the room and buried his face in my legs. I picked him up, inhaling the scent of his baby shampoo, feeling his small heart beat against mine. "Did you have a good work day, Mama?" he asked. "Yes, baby," I whispered, kissing his forehead. "A very good day." I held him tighter. Mark might have signed the deal, but he had no idea that he had just signed his own death warrant. I would not let that man or his toxicity ever touch my son. The game had just begun. I did not come to this war alone. I brought an army, led by James, the sharpest attorney in Chicago and the only man I trusted with my life. While Mark thought we were simply auditing his current cash flow, James and a team of private investigators were dissecting the anatomy of his entire life. The reports that landed on my desk 3 days later were damning. Mark and Jessica were not just bad at business, they were criminals. They had been skimming off the top of employee pension funds to pay for luxury leases, and there were glaring holes where tax payments should have been. They were robbing Peter to pay Paul, and now I was the one holding the magnifying glass. Mark, oblivious to the noose tightening around his neck, decided to play the lover. It started with a bouquet of white lilies sent to my hotel suite, my favorite flowers from a lifetime ago. Then came the notes, begging for a chance to clear the air. I agreed to meet him for lunch at Le Bouchon, not because I wanted to hear his lies, but because I needed him to speak them into the microphone concealed inside my diamond brooch. Mark arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a new suit that he likely could not afford. He looked at me with puppy dog eyes, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I pulled back just enough to be polite but distant. "You look incredible, Evelyn," Mark said, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "God, I have missed you. You have no idea what my life has been like." I took a slow sip of my water. "I imagine it has been exciting. You have Jessica, the love of your life, the woman who gave you inspiration. Remember." Mark scoffed, a bitter sound that twisted his face. "Jessica is a mistake," he muttered, leaning in closer. "She is lazy. Evelyn, she spends money we do not have on clothes she does not need, and she is so jealous. It is suffocating. She is nothing like you. You were always my rock." I suppressed the urge to vomit. He was rewriting history to suit his needs. And the child, Mark asked suddenly, his eyes darting around as if looking for Leo. He is 3. Maybe 3.5 years old, I did the math. Evelyn. He looks just like me. I held his gaze, my expression unreadable. Leo is a very special boy, I said, offering him nothing but ambiguity. He is smart, kind, and he has a bright future. Mark swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He was convinced. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He saw a son and a rich ex-wife as his ticket out of ruin. Mark, I said softly, setting the trap. If you regret everything so much, tell me the truth about that night. The $50,000 you accused me of stealing from our savings. You knew I never took it, didn't you? Mark hesitated, looking at the tablecloth. He needed me on his side. He needed my money. I know, he admitted, his voice low. I knew you wouldn't do that. It was Jessica. She moved the money to a secret account and printed the fake bank statements to show me. She said we needed a clean break to force you out. I just went along with it because I was weak. There it was, the confession. Before I could press him further, a commotion erupted at the entrance of the restaurant. Where is he? Where is my husband? Jessica stormed into the dining room, her hair disheveled and her eyes wild. She had followed him. She spotted us and marched over, her face contorted with rage. I knew it! She screamed, causing every diner in the restaurant to freeze. You are trying to crawl back to this rich bitch. Jessica, lower your voice, Mark hissed, standing up. You are embarrassing yourself. I am embarrassing myself, Jessica shrieked. She grabbed a glass of water from the table and threw its contents at Mark. You are the one begging your ex-wife for money. You are pathetic. The restaurant staff rushed over, trying to intervene, but the scene was already chaotic. Mark was wiping water off his face, shouting insults at Jessica, calling her a crazy psycho. Jessica was sobbing and screaming about how he was a liar. I sat there, perfectly still. I did not shout. I did not fight. I simply watched them destroy each other, the red recording light on my phone under the table blinking steadily. It was a masterclass in self-destruction. Eventually, security escorted them both out. I paid the bill, tipped the waiter generously for the trouble, and walked out the back exit. Back in my suite, James was waiting for me. He looked serious. Did you get it? He asked. Every word, I replied, unpinning the brooch. He admitted to the frame-up. But you look like you have something else. James slid a thick manila envelope across the coffee table. My investigator found this an hour ago, James said grimly. We checked into some shadow loans. It turns out Jessica has a gambling problem, but that is not the worst part. To cover her debts to some very dangerous loan sharks, she took out a high-interest loan 2 years ago. I opened the file. My eyes widened as I looked at the loan documents. That is my signature, I whispered. It is a forgery, James confirmed. She used your old identification documents to borrow $200,000 in your name from an illegal underground lender. And since she hasn't paid in months, those sharks aren't looking for her. Evelyn, they are looking for you. Jessica looked like a woman who had been running a marathon in heels on broken glass. When she walked into my temporary office at the Novus branch, the arrogance that usually defined her was gone, replaced by a trembling, frantic energy. She knew the walls were closing in. She had realized that Mark was not just trying to save his company, he was trying to replace her with me to get access to my fortune and the son he suddenly coveted. Evelyn, she started, her voice cracking. You have to help me. Mark. He is planning to kick me out. He told me last night that I am a liability. I sat behind my desk, steepling my fingers. I watched her tears fall, feeling absolutely nothing. It was fascinating to see how quickly the predator became the prey. You wanted him, Jessica, I said, my voice flat. You wanted my husband. You wanted my life. You broke into my home and my marriage to take him. Now you have him. Why are you complaining? Jessica gripped the edge of my desk, her knuckles white. Because he is useless, she screamed, then immediately lowered her voice, looking around fearfully. I always wanted what you had because you made it look perfect. Evelyn. But he is an anchor around my neck. He is lazy, he is selfish, and now he wants to dump me back on the street so he can play happy family with you and that boy. Leo, I corrected her sharply. His name is Leo. I opened my drawer and pulled out the file James had given me. I slid the evidence of the forged loan documents across the polished wood surface. I do not care about your marital troubles. Jessica, I care about this, I said. $200,000 borrowed from criminals using my name. That is fraud. That is identity theft. And since the people you borrowed from are not exactly bankers, I imagine they are quite angry. Jessica looked at the paper, and her face went gray. She collapsed into the chair opposite me, burying her face in her hands. I had to, she sobbed. I had debts. Mark wouldn't give me any money. I have 2 options for you. I cut through her excuses. Option 1. I hand this file to the police and the loan sharks, and you go to prison or worse. Option 2. You go to the authorities yourself, confess to everything, including the embezzlement you and Mark did at the company, and testify against him. Jessica looked up, her eyes wide with terror. She was trapped. But then, a flash of spite crossed her face. She realized she had one card left to play, one piece of information that could hurt me as much as I was hurting her. If I go down, he goes down, Jessica whispered, a twisted smile forming on her lips. But you should know who you are really dealing with. Evelyn, you think Mark left you just because I seduced him. You think he didn't know. I narrowed my eyes. Know what? About the baby, she said, the words hanging in the air like poison smoke. Mark knew you were pregnant that night, 4 years ago. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. My breath caught in my throat. That is a lie, I said, my voice barely audible. I never told him. I found out that same day. The clinic called the house phone that afternoon to confirm your follow-up appointment, Jessica said, enjoying the pain she was inflicting. Mark took the call. He knew. Evelyn. He told me about it before you even came home. He said he had to divorce you that night, right then and there, because if he waited, a child would make the divorce too complicated and expensive. He threw you out into the rain knowing you were carrying his child because he didn't want to pay child support. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that was deeper than any winter chill. It was not just betrayal anymore. It was evil. Mark had not just chosen another woman. He had knowingly tried to destroy his own unborn child to save a few dollars. Get out, I whispered. Evelyn, get out. I slammed my hand on the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Get out of my sight before I kill you myself. Jessica scrambled out of the room, terrified by the darkness she had unleashed in me. I sat there for a long time, staring at the closed door. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like it could burn the building down. The plan had changed. I did not just want their money. I did not just want their house. I wanted to incinerate every aspect of Mark's existence. I left the office and went straight back to the hotel. It was late. The room was dim, lit only by the city lights outside. I walked into the bedroom where Leo was sleeping. He looked so peaceful, his chest rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. He was the only good thing that had come from that monster. I brushed a curl off his forehead, my heart breaking for the father he would never have. Mark did not deserve to breathe the same air as this boy. I pulled out my phone and dialed James. Evelyn, it is late, James answered. Change of plans. James, I said, my voice steady and cold as steel. We are not waiting. File the lawsuit tomorrow. And James, prepare the paperwork to terminate Mark's parental rights. I want full sole custody. If he tries to claim Leo, I will bury him so deep under legal fees and criminal charges that he will never see the sun again. The morning papers were not kind. Mark, desperate and cornered, had decided to burn the bridge he was standing on. He had filed a petition with the family court demanding a paternity test and full custody of Leo, but he did not stop there. He leaked the filing to the tabloids, painting a tearful picture of a heartbroken father who had been cruelly separated from his son by a vindictive, wealthy ex-wife. The headlines screamed, "Billionaire CEO hides secret son from struggling father." When I stepped out of my hotel, a wall of flashing lights blinded me. Microphones were shoved in my face like weapons. "Ms. Vance, did you keep the child a secret? Is Mark the father? Do you hate men?" I wore my sunglasses and said absolutely nothing. My silence was a canvas upon which they could paint their mysteries. But it was also a calculated delay. Mark thought he was winning the court of public opinion, but he forgot that I played in the court of Wall Street. That afternoon, I held a press conference at the headquarters of Novus Holdings. I stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of journalists who were expecting a domestic drama. Instead, I gave them a financial execution. "I am not here to discuss my personal life," I began, my voice steady and amplified through the room. "I am here to address serious financial irregularities concerning MJ Tech Solutions, a company in which Novus holds a controlling debt interest. Our audit has revealed that for the past 2 years, the CEO, Mark, has systematically falsified revenue reports to defraud investors." I motioned to the screen behind me, where colorful charts displayed the undeniable proof of his theft. "We are freezing all assets and initiating a fraud lawsuit immediately," I concluded. The effect was instantaneous. Within an hour, MJ Tech stock plummeted by 70%. Investors who had believed Mark's sob story suddenly cared a lot more about their money than his fatherhood. He was radioactive. Mark stormed into my office less than 2 hours later. He bypassed the receptionist, his face red and his eyes manic. He looked at me with a mix of hatred and pleading, but I looked through him as if he were made of glass. You witch!" Mark screamed, slamming the door behind him. "You destroyed everything my investors are pulling out. My phone won't stop ringing." I sat calmly behind my desk, my hand resting near the silent alarm button. I had already hit the record button on my phone. "You destroyed yourself, Mark," I said. "I just turned on the lights." Mark marched around the desk, leaning over me, his breath smelling of stale alcohol. "You think you can win," he hissed, spit flying from his mouth. "I filed the papers. Evelyn, I will get custody. I will take that boy away from you. Unless what?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Unless you bail out the company," Mark said, a twisted desperation in his eyes. "You write me a check for $5 million, right now, to cover the debts and the lawsuits. If you do that, I will drop the custody case. I will go away. But if you don't, I will take Leo, and I will make sure you never see him again." I stared at him, feeling a wave of disgust so potent it almost made me dizzy. He was selling his son. He was using Leo as a hostage in a business negotiation. "So, Leo is just a bargaining chip to you?" I asked. "He is leverage." Mark sneered, "And right now, he is the only asset I have left." I pressed the button under my desk. "Thank you, Mark," I said, standing up. "You just gave me everything I needed." "What?" The door burst open. James walked in, followed by 2 large security guards and a uniformed police officer. James held a document in his hand. "Mark, this is a temporary restraining order," James announced, his tone bored but authoritative. And since you just threatened to kidnap a minor for extortion, which Ms. Vance has recorded, you are now trespassing. Escort him out." Mark's face went pale. He looked from me to the guards, realizing he had walked into a trap. "No, wait, Evelyn, I was just angry, I didn't mean—" "Get him out!" I ordered. As the guards dragged him away, kicking and shouting, I sank back into my chair. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. James walked over to the desk. "We have him. Evelyn, that recording proves he is unfit. But there is something else." He placed a new file on my desk. We dug deeper into the loan sharks that Jessica mentioned. James said, "It turns out Jessica wasn't the only one borrowing money. Mark is in debt to the same organization for over $300,000, and now that his company stock has crashed, they know he cannot pay." I looked at the file, a cold smile touching my lips. "So," I whispered, "the wolves are not just at the door. They are already in the house." The shadows around Mark were growing longer and darker. The criminal organization holding his debt had lost their patience, and they expressed their displeasure with brutal efficiency. On Tuesday morning, Mark found his luxury sedan with every window smashed and the tires slashed. Pinned to the hood with a hunting knife was a note that demanded payment within 48 hours. The terror was real, and it broke whatever sanity he had left. Desperation breeds madness. Mark realized he could not get the money from the company, so he turned his eyes toward the only leverage he thought he had: my son. He convinced himself that if he took Leo, I would hand over my entire fortune to get him back. It was a clumsy, frantic plan born of a mind that had snapped. But that made it unpredictable and dangerous. I felt the shift in the air before I even knew the details. A mother's instinct is a powerful alarm system. I immediately pulled Leo out of his preschool and moved us from the hotel to a secure, unlisted safe house on the outskirts of the city. I hired 3 former military bodyguards to stand watch 24 hours a day. I was ready for war, but I did not expect the warning to come from the enemy camp. My phone rang at 2 o'clock in the morning. The number was blocked. "Hello?" I answered, alert instantly. "Evelyn, don't hang up. It is Jessica." The voice on the other end was a whisper, trembling with hysteria. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't block you right now," I said. "Because he is going to take him." Jessica sobbed, her voice barely audible. "Mark, he is talking about grabbing the boy. He bought a van. He has duct tape. Evelyn, I hate you. I really do. But I cannot go to jail for kidnapping. I cannot be an accessory to this. He is crazy." I pressed the record button on my phone, my hand gripping the device so hard my knuckles turned white. "Tell me exactly what he is planning." "Jessica," I commanded, "tell me everything, and maybe I will mention your cooperation to the district attorney." "He knows you are going to the Children's Hospital Charity Gala tomorrow," she stammered. "He says the security will be focused on the entrances. He plans to sneak in through the catering service. He wants to grab Leo from the play area and take him to a warehouse by the docks. He says he will make you pay $5 million, or he will—" She trailed off, choking on a sob. "Thank you, Jessica," I said coldly. "You just saved yourself from a life sentence." I hung up and immediately called James. Within the hour, we were on a conference call with the FBI and the Chicago Police Department. We had the recording. We had the intent. Now, we needed to spring the trap. The charity gala was a glittering affair held in a massive ballroom downtown. To the public, it looked like business as usual. I walked the red carpet in a stunning emerald gown, smiling for the cameras, looking every bit the relaxed billionaire. But underneath the silk, I was wired with a microphone. The venue was swarming with undercover officers dressed as waiters, guests, and photographers. I placed Leo in the designated VIP childcare area, a cordoned-off section filled with toys and supervised by 4 nannies, 2 of whom were actually federal agents. I stood near the bar, sipping sparkling water, my eyes scanning the room like a hawk. At 8:30, a man wearing a generic gray catering uniform and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes entered the room pushing a cart of dirty dishes. He moved with a nervous, jerky energy. He bypassed the kitchen doors and steered the cart toward the play area. I watched, my heart hammering against my ribs, as he parked the cart and approached the low fence. He lowered his mask. It was Mark. He looked haggard, his eyes sunken and wild. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a brightly colored toy car. Hey there, buddy," Mark whispered, leaning over the fence toward Leo, who was building a tower of blocks. Do you want to see a cool car? Come here? Come with Daddy?" Leo looked up, confused. He did not recognize this strange, desperate man. Before Mark could touch a single hair on my son's head, the room exploded into action. "Police, get on the ground!" 6 officers materialized from the crowd, weapons drawn but pointed low. Mark froze, his hand still extended. He looked around in panic, realizing too late that the guests surrounding him were not donors, but detectives. No, I am his father," Mark screamed, trying to scramble over the cart. 2 officers tackled him to the marble floor. The crash of dishes and the sound of Mark's struggle silenced the entire ballroom. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing every second of his disgrace. Leo, shielded instantly by the agents, barely noticed the commotion. He was safely escorted out the back, thinking it was just part of a game. I walked over to where Mark was pinned down, his face pressed against the cold floor, handcuffs clicking tight around his wrists. He looked up at me, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. "Evelyn," he howled. "Help me. They are going to kill me in prison. Help me." I looked down at him, the man who had once been my world, and felt nothing but a profound sense of closure. "You should have thought about that before you tried to sell our son," I said, my voice cutting through the silence of the room so everyone could hear. "Goodbye, Mark," as the police dragged him away through the gauntlet of flashing cameras. I knew his life as a free man was over. He had wanted the world's attention. Now, he finally had it. The courtroom was a sterile box of polished wood and fluorescent lights, a fitting place to dissect the corpse of my marriage. Mark sat at the defendant's table, looking diminished. He had managed to secure bail because he had not physically harmed Leo yet, but the bulky GPS monitor strapped to his ankle ruined the line of his trousers. He looked at me with a mix of hatred and pleading, but I looked through him as if he were made of glass. His lawyer, a man with a comb-over and a cheap suit, stood up to deliver his opening statement. He tried to paint a picture of Mark as a victim of circumstances, a loving father kept from his son by a cold, career-obsessed woman. "Ms. Vance is a corporate shark," the lawyer declaimed, gesturing dramatically at me. "She works 80 hours a week. She is vindictive. She hid this child for 3.5 years out of spite, denying my client his fundamental human right to be a father." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table. I did not cry. I did not frown. I let him finish his performance because I knew that facts are louder than adjectives. When it was my turn to take the stand, James guided me through the testimony with surgical precision. We did not rely on emotional appeals. "We relied on the paper trail," Ms. Vance, James asked, holding up a file. Why did you not inform Mr. Vance about the pregnancy 4 years ago?" "Because he already knew," I stated clearly, my voice ringing in the silent room. "And he chose to leave anyway." A murmur ran through the gallery. Mark's lawyer jumped up to object, but James was faster. "Your Honor, we submit Exhibit C. These are the phone records from the clinic on November 12th, 4 years ago, showing a 6-minute conversation with Mark's personal cell phone. We also have a sworn affidavit from the nurse who spoke to him, confirming he was informed of the positive pregnancy test. Mark's face went white, but I was not done. And regarding his desire to be a father, James continued, pressing a button on his laptop. We retrieved this audio file from a cloud backup of the couple's shared home assistant device, recorded on the night of the divorce. Mark's voice, younger and arrogant, filled the courtroom. I just want to be free, Jessica. I hate kids. They are loud, expensive parasites. If she is pregnant, I hope she gets rid of it. I want to live my life. The silence that followed was deafening. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked at Mark with open disgust. Mark shrank into his chair, unable to look anyone in the eye. James then pivoted to the financial slaughter. He laid out the forensic accounting reports showing how Mark and Jessica had embezzled $50,000 from our joint savings 4 years ago, the very money they accused me of stealing. He showed the recent fraudulent investor reports and the Ponzi scheme they were running at MJ Tech. Then came the final nail in the coffin. The bailiff opened the doors and Jessica walked in. She looked small and broken, wearing no makeup. She had cut a deal. In exchange for leniency regarding the kidnapping plot, she had agreed to testify. Ms. Vance, the prosecutor asked her, who orchestrated the plan to embezzle the funds and later to kidnap the child. Jessica did not hesitate. She pointed a shaking finger at the man she had destroyed her relationship with her sister for. It was Mark, she sobbed. It was all Mark. He told me to forge the documents. He told me he would kill me if I didn't help him grab the boy. He said Leo was just a payout. You liar, Mark screamed, jumping up from his seat. You treacherous snake. You came up with the idea. You spent all the money. Order in the court, the judge shouted, banging her gavel. Mark was red-faced, veins bulging in his neck, looking every inch the violent, unstable man I knew him to be. The bailiffs moved in, forcing him back into his chair. I watched them turn on each other, 2 rats fighting on a sinking ship. I felt no triumph, only a deep, nauseating pity. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked down at Mark. Mr. Vance, your behavior in this courtroom, combined with the overwhelming evidence of your moral and financial bankruptcy, leaves me with no doubts. She ruled. I am stripping you of all parental rights effective immediately. You are to have no contact with the child. Furthermore, given the evidence of fraud and conspiracy presented today, I am revoking your bail. You will be remanded to custody pending the criminal trial. Mark slumped forward, his forehead hitting the table. It was over. As the officers hauled him up to take him back to a cell, he turned his head and looked at me. Then his eyes shifted to the photo of Leo that James had placed on the evidence table. For a second, I saw a flicker of genuine regret in his eyes, the crushing realization that he had traded a treasure for fool's gold. Evelyn, he whispered. I turned my back on him and walked out of the courtroom, into the fresh air. The silence that followed the trial was heavier than the noise of the scandal. In the weeks that passed, the empire of lies that Mark and Jessica had built crumbled into dust. MJ Tech Solutions declared bankruptcy, its assets liquidated to pay off a fraction of the debts they owed. The bank, spurred on by my legal team, foreclosed on the property at 42 Oak Street. I bought the house at the auction for a fraction of its market value. Walking into the living room felt like stepping into a mausoleum. The furniture was gone, sold to pay creditors, leaving only outlines on the dusty carpet where the sofa used to sit. This was the house where I had been a bride, where I had dreamed of a family, and where I had been discarded. Now, I stood in the center of the empty room, holding the deed in my hand, feeling not joy, but a hollow sense of completion. A frantic knocking at the front door broke the silence. I knew who it was. I had instructed security to let him through the gate one last time. Mark stumbled into the room. He looked like a skeleton wrapped in dirty clothes. His eyes were bloodshot, darting around the empty space as if looking for a place to hide. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw, animalistic fear of a hunted man. "Evelyn," he gasped, falling to his knees before me. "You have to help me. Please. The loan sharks. They know I am out on bail. They are going to kill me. Evelyn. They sent me a picture of a grave with my name on it." I looked down at him, remembering the man who had once sneered at my tears. "And what do you expect me to do, Mark?" I asked calmly. "Money," he begged, crawling forward to grab the hem of my pants. "I just need enough to get out of the country. $10,000. Please. For the sake of what we had." I stepped back, pulling my leg away from his touch. I walked over to the mantel where my purse sat. I pulled out my checkbook and a pen. Mark watched me, hope rekindling in his desperate eyes. He thought he had won. He thought I was still the foolish woman who loved him. I wrote the check slowly, tore it out with a crisp sound, and let it flutter down to the floor in front of him. Mark scrambled to pick it up. His hands shook as he brought the paper to his eyes. Then he froze. $40. He stammered, looking up at me in confusion. "Evelyn, this is a joke. What can I do with $40? I stared at him, my expression as cold as the marble floor. "That is the exact amount of cash you threw at me 4 years ago when you kicked me out into the rain," I said softly. "It is enough for a bus ticket out of the city and a warm meal. That is all the mercy you gave me, and that is all the mercy you will get." But I will die," he cried, tears streaming down his face. "This is the final charity. Mark," I said, "not for you, but because you provided the genetic material that made Leo. Now, get out of my house." Mark stared at the check, his shoulders shaking with sobs. The realization finally hit him. He had traded a loyal wife, a brilliant son, and a life of comfort for a moment of pleasure and a lifetime of ruin. He clutched the check to his chest, the only lifeline he had left, and stumbled out into the night, weeping like a child. Jessica did not get a visit. She was currently sitting in a holding cell at the county jail. Mark, in his initial panic before the trial, had handed over evidence of her forgery to the police to try and cut a deal for himself. He had thrown her under the bus just as easily as he had thrown me. I went to the visitation center 2 days later. I sat behind the thick glass partition. Jessica walked in, wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with her pale, gaunt skin. She looked at me, expecting me to gloat, to yell, or to lecture her. I did not say a word. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out an old photograph. It was a picture of us as teenagers, laughing on a beach, back when we were sisters and not enemies. I had torn it perfectly down the middle. I pressed the half with my face on it against the glass. Then I dropped the half with her face into the trash bin beside me. Jessica's eyes widened. She slammed her hand against the glass. "Evelyn, say something, scream at me," she yelled, her voice muffled by the barrier. "Don't just look at me, I am your sister." I stood up, buttoned my coat, and walked away. Her screams faded behind me. By refusing to engage, I had denied her the satisfaction of being a victim. She was nothing to me now, just a stranger with a shared history that I had erased. I walked out of the jail and into the bright afternoon sun. The air felt cleaner. The weight that had pressed on my chest for 4 years was gone, lifted by the sight of their complete destruction. I had my son. I had my dignity. I had won. But as I climbed into the back of my car, a shadow of unease flickered in my mind. Mark was gone, and Jessica was locked away. But the debt they owed to the criminal underworld had not vanished. Those men wanted their money, and they knew that the ex-wife was the one with the deep pockets. I looked out the window, watching the city pass by. "Driver," I said, my voice hardening again. "Take me to James. We have one last knot to untie." The revenge was complete, but the war for my safety was not over yet. I had one final trap to set. The final loose end did not dangle for long. 2 nights after the trial, as my car idled at a red light on a deserted stretch of Wacker Drive, a black SUV swerved violently in front of us, blocking the road. 3 men stepped out, their faces obscured by shadows, holding baseball bats and crowbars. They were the wolves Mark had unleashed, the loan sharks who realized their original debtor was penniless. They had come to the only person they thought had money. They thought I was just a helpless woman in a gilded cage who would pay to make the fear go away. They were wrong. I did not scream. I did not lock the doors. I opened the door and stepped out into the harsh streetlight, smoothing my coat. "We want the money your husband owes us," the leader shouted, slapping a metal pipe against his palm. "Pay up, or things get ugly." I looked him in the eye, my pulse steady. "I am not his wife," I said, my voice cutting through the night air. "And you made a terrible mistake coming here." I raised my right hand, instantaneously. Blinding floodlights erupted from the alleyways and the rooftops surrounding us. "Police, drop your weapons! Get on the ground!" Chief Miller, a close friend of James, stepped out from behind a parked van with a full tactical team, weapons drawn. I had not been careless. I had been the bait. I knew these men would come for me, and I refused to live my life looking over my shoulder. I wanted them off the board permanently so they could never threaten Leo. As the men were handcuffed and shoved into the back of squad cars, cursing and bewildered, I stood tall. I was a mother protecting her cub, and that made me more dangerous than any gangster. I had cleaned up Mark's final mess. Not for him, but for my future. Mark's own end was even more pathetic than his financial ruin. The police picked him up an hour later in a dirty alleyway behind a liquor store. He had tried to use the $40 check I gave him, the check that was supposed to buy him a bus ticket to a new life, to buy illegal narcotics to numb his pain. By doing so, he violated the strict terms of his bail. His freedom was revoked permanently. He would spend the next decade behind bars, rotting in a cell while I built an empire. A week later, I stood on the edge of North Avenue Beach. The wind whipped my hair around my face, but it felt cleansing, like it was scrubbing away the grime of the last 4 years. I remembered standing on this exact spot 4 years ago, pregnant and homeless, looking at the dark, churning water and wondering if it would be easier to just let the waves take me. Today, I stood here as a survivor. I stood here as a victor. Mama. Leo ran across the sand, his laughter carrying over the sound of the crashing waves. He collided with my legs, burying his face in my coat. I picked him up, holding him tight against the world, inhaling the scent of the sea and his innocent childhood. "I love you, Mama," he said, patting my cheek. "I love you too, Leo," I whispered, kissing his forehead. "I will raise you to be strong. I will raise you to be kind. And I promise you, you will never, ever be like him." James walked up the dunes, his shoes sinking slightly in the sand. He held a blue legal folder in his hand. He did not say a word. He just handed me a pen and the document. It was the petition for a legal name change. I placed the paper on the wooden railing of the boardwalk. With a steady hand, I signed my name. It was the final severance. Mark was legally erased from our lives. Leo was mine, wholly and completely. He would bear my name, and he would inherit my strength, not his father's weakness. "It is done," James said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yes," I replied, handing the folder back. "It is finally done." I took Leo's hand, and together we walked down the shoreline toward the rising sun. The clouds were breaking, revealing a brilliant, piercing blue sky. Behind us, the waves rushed in, washing away our footprints in the sand, erasing the path we had walked, just as I had erased the pain of the past. We did not look back. We just kept walking toward the light. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts on the ending. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.